Dr. Helge Kreutzmann, which has kindly agreed to present in this CyberSec for Europe webinar series. So the webinar will follow our usual structure. We try to contain the webinar in 1 hour, devoting the first part of the webinar to the presentation, and then we will have a second part of the webinar with Q&A. So feel free after the presentation of Dr. Kreutzmann to intervene and ask a relevant question to our presenter today. Again, the title of the presentation is Introducing Fixed-Time Cybersecurity Evaluation Methodology for ICT Products. And I'm very happy to give the floor to Dr. Helge Kreutzmann. Helge, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, thank you for the kind introduction, and for introducing the topic and putting it into perspective. So, a few words about myself. You already introduced me briefly. I'm a member of the German Federal Office for Information Security for about 15 years now, and I'm focused on working on certification, accreditation, recognition, this domain, this realm. In many standardization bodies, I'm active. For example, the German DIN, CEN-CENELEC, ISO IEC, and also I participated in preparatory work for several cybersecurity schemes. I will tell you a little bit about this in a moment, what this means, and also a little bit on this in the smallest aspect in the European European Common Criteria scheme, and that's why I'm here. I'm editor of 17640, a European standard devoted to fixed time evaluation. So that should be enough about me. You find a short bio on the web page as presented by Pascal. So let me now go forward to the topic. First, I would like to introduce the European landscape for cybersecurity certification, especially the so-called lightweight or fixed time cybersecurity landscape. This leads me why we designed the standard and how we designed the standard 1764-6040. I will give you a brief history of the standard, how we developed it, but that's very short. But then I would like to focus on the structure and how the standard works, what it actually means, what it does. Then, since you might not all know what the Cybersecurity Act is, I will also give you a brief overview of this. I'm not a legal professional, so please bear with me if I'm not saying it 100% right, but I'll give you just the general ideas. And then I will go back to the standard and look how it fits into this ecosystem, how it can be used in the future. And I will finalize with some open topics, next steps, before giving a brief summary. So here you see Europe, or at least European Union, most of the European Union, and there have been some efforts in the past, or some ideas in the past to create a new way of certification, so-called fixed-time certification. The first to pioneer this field was the French ANSSI, which created the Certification de Sécurité de Premier Niveau. I'm sorry, I don't speak French, so I will call it CSPN in the future. Then there was a Dutch scheme created, BSPA. Also, the Spanish scheme came up, Linse. And in Germany, we soon start with our own scheme in this domain, BSZ. It will be launched in October this year. And I heard there are even more, which might not be as prominent as these, which I have on this slide, but which are available for customers to use. But they are all very similar, but slightly different in some ways, and especially there's no basic rule behind them. While these were developed, the Cybersecurity Act, I will tell you about this a little bit later, but it's a European regulation for certification, came up. And this act had some design principles for standards. And amongst this was, for example, 3 assurance levels. And also, there were many efforts to create certification schemes for this domain, for Europe, for the Cybersecurity Act, which in the past had used, for example, CSPN. So there was clearly a need to make a standard behind all of these, which fits both the Cybersecurity Act, but also the requirements, for example, from industrial automation and control systems. So that why we set up and said, okay, we need to create a standard which is exactly catering these needs. It should be able to completely fulfill the Cybersecurity Act natively, not bolted on and twisted and turned, but really natively. But it should also be possible to adapt it to the needs of the users. For example, industrial automation, or maybe there are other domains which like to use these ideas. It should be usable both as a horizontal standard, so independent of any specific domain, but also as a vertical, for example, for industrial automation and control systems. It should be possible to just have what the law requires. So if you really down and say, well, I don't want anything more in my domain, that should be fine. But on the same time, the existing methodologies I showed you above should be reproducible. So in the future, be it SET or CSPN or LIMTHE could say, well, I use 176040, and that's fine. So that's, I can base my procedures on this and have a common evaluation methodology. Stepping back from the legal side or from the regulatory side, we also think about the users of the standard, and there are two kinds of users. And one major user is, of course, the vendor who develops a product, and we want to make it as easy as possible for him to use the standard or to be certified in the end. So that was another design principle, to make the workload on the developer as low as possible. This, on the other hand, causes that the iterator competence is a very important topic, because what you in other certification schemes based on documentation and evidence from the vendor, you will now put as burden on the evaluator. And finally, we are not doing a lightweight common criteria or CEM. So that's misunderstanding. I often heard we might use some ideas, yes, but it's not a stripped down common criteria. As I said, I will just briefly tell you how we developed it. The first ideas came around 2018. We then made a new work item proposal, and then please note the highlighted dates. Within 1 year, we basically developed this standard. We had lots of meetings. They were all virtual. You all know the reason why we couldn't meet in this time. Then there was an unforeseen delay in the standardization process, but now we are in the final vote. So prEN now. So a German-French translation has occurred, and currently all experts are kindly asked to review the standard, which I now want to introduce to you. If you've worked with standards before, you won't be surprised that, of course, there's first a scope, which I basically explained to you already in more verbose words than that's written in the standard, but you got the idea. We have a conformance clause where we explain how you can claim conformance to the standard. That's especially important since we try to cater so many users. And I will give you example on this later on in this talk. We don't have any normative references. This was an important topic for us because we don't want to have a long string of requirement standard in the end. We want to be self-contained, and we try to keep it up this way. Let's look if it works out, but I'm rather confident. Then we, of course, define terms and definitions. And then I will show you in a moment our general concepts and how evaluation tasks are going on. Then we have some annexes. Again, you might be surprised to read common criterion terminology here, but it's actually, the idea is similar, but the content is not. It's much stripped down, if you like. We explain how a security target works. So how do you describe the security properties of your product? If you like, you could use protection profiles for generalized products, so on a high-level way to describe the security properties of products. There's the concept of acceptance criteria. I will have a slide on this in a moment. I will explain to you NXD later on, how you could use the standard if you're creating a scheme. And I said you can parameterize, you can adapt the standard for your needs. These are Annex E and F. And of course, if you've done an evaluation, you need to report it to a certification body, and that's what Annex G is about. So how does an evaluation task look like? It's rather boring, but that's good for such a standard because you want to recognize the elements all the time again. Each evaluation task has an aim, which tells you what this task is supposed to do, to claim, to reach, to say. Then we describe how it's done. Is it paperwork? Is it actual testing? Some research needed? Then, as I said, evaluation qualification is necessary. So we describe what kind of knowledge an evaluator needs to have. And then the most important part, if you like, are the actual work units, where we describe, as an evaluation methodology should do, what the evaluator should do. So the exact steps he should follow, what he should report, and things like this. What kind of tools he might use or not use. Here's a list of evaluation tasks. I will show you some of them, or give you some ideas of some of them in an example I have later on. Basically, there are 4 blocks of tasks. You start up in evaluation, where you look, do you have all the things required? Do you have the device you want to test? Do you have a security target? Does it work out? Is everything described there? As I said, there could be a protection profile, or even if you don't have a full security target, just a list of security functionality, which can be for very low assurance already sufficient. And then the developer might bring in some documentation. This will be very lightweight, but still you might have, let's say, a few sheets of papers, for example, a secure user guide, what you should do to actually bring the device into a secure mode, how to set it up, if you like. Then the next step would be to actually install, bring up the tow. So does it really go into safe and a secure mode? Does it boot if it's a computer, or does it start up? And in the end, is it really secure as claimed by the vendor? Then the third block are the actual testing. We have 2 kinds of testing. There's the conformance testing. That's the how. Does the device do what's intended to do? So if the vendor claims, well, I'm doing TLS 1.2, then you could check, is there actually TLS 1.2? You can use tools there nicely just to check if the security functionality which is claimed there. And then the second part of this block is probably the most interesting for many evaluators, because here you're trying to attack the tow. You're trying to find vulnerabilities. This could be in a very low mode, a very high level, maybe just paper-based mode, but I would only recommend it for very low assurance evaluations. And the Cybersecurity Act doesn't allow it for higher anyway. But then you could do some specific testing there. Or if you really need big confidence into your device, you could go for penetration testing. That's if you have done, or have you worked with CSPN or Linthe, you will know that's a major part of the evaluation, where the evaluator really looks at the device and tries to conquer it, tries to access the secrets with a very creative way. So it's risk-driven. You make a plan how you could attack this device and try to succeed. And then there's another part, it's about cryptography. It could be rather high level, where you just check, are the algorithms state of the art? Or it could be low level, that's extended cryptanalysis, where you look at the source code, where you look at the actual implementation to see if the AES or whatever has been implemented is actually done correctly. Of course, as in the second part, the testing, it never been a full analysis. We're trying to do this in a fixed time. So it will be just a high level, well, not high level, a risk-driven effort to show that by sufficient sampling, you have confidence that it actually is done correctly. I said I wanted to say some words about the acceptance criteria. That's a tool. It's not mandatory for the standard, but the evaluators may use it to help them devise test cases. So for example, what you can see on the screen, you have some security requirement that says, I need to have authentication, which is probably most likely on many devices. And then you have the question about feedback when you try to connect to your device, when you try to log in. And then one could say, okay, I check that there's no sensitive data is presented, that no feedback is given if you have a wrong password, and also no timing issues. So if you enter the right user password but a wrong username but a wrong password, or vice versa, you get different response times than if both are wrong. So these are many pages of guidance for evaluators who want to come up with test cases when they're checking their device, which they're evaluating. We have lots of topics covered there, for example, secure boot, secure state after failure, update mechanism. It's very important because we all know we have to foresee updates. It's a very important part of modern IT. So that, of course, should be checked as well. So now I step back for a moment and look at the European landscape. So this part of the talk is a little bit more about the legal background. There's a Cybersecurity Act. You can see the full title on the screen. It has been published or came into force 2019. It has two parts, one on the European Network Security Agency, which is not relevant for this talk. And then there's a part on the development and requirements for cybersecurity certification schemes. So it does not say a certification scheme for common criteria is as follows, but rather presents a way how to get there. It has 3 assurance levels: basic, where you can also do a statement of conformity, so a claim by the vendor without involving another lab, and then the classical certifications at basic, substantial, and high. At substantial with private certification bodies, and basic, of course, as well, and high usually with governmental certification bodies. I'm not going into each detail of the slide, just to give you a general overview how the EUCC works. How the CSA works when creating what are the stakeholders. The actual part of creating is on the next slide. I apologize. We have a very important group which is called the ad hoc working group. You will find it on many slides on the slides in the next page. That's why I marked it yellow here. Then you have the industry, which is gathered in the stakeholder certification group. This group advises the EU Commission what should be done. So at which area do they see a requirement for certification schemes? And they do this in a certain process. And the result is a union rolling work program. There's a list. Well, there is no such program yet, so we're still waiting for it. But once it's published, there's a list where industry sees the most urgent need for certification, for European certification. We have had a draft last year, and there, for example, industrial automation and control systems, 5G, and IoT were listed, but we're waiting for the final version. Then on the left-hand side, you have the European Network Information Security Agency, ENISA, which is has a key role in this entire scheme, in this entire system, because the Commission will then decide which scheme to create. They look at the Union Rolling Work Program. They can also come up with own ideas, like they did so far, because there is no such URVP. They go to ENISA and say, please, we need a scheme. They get help from this ad hoc working group. They support the Commission, of course, in all matters related to cybersecurity. So they give their advice. And in the end, the ENISA will operate the scheme, meaning they will look at the high level structure, will look that all European players are doing their part, and they all cooperate with the ECCG. The ECCG is a European Cyber Certification Group. There, each member state sends a representative from its NCCA, National Cybersecurity Certification Authority. Sorry, so many acronyms, I apologize. But you have this slide, you can look it up later on. And they work together. In the end, the European Commission, which is in the middle, will get all this input, and they will write a proposal for a law to create this scheme. And the exact process you can see here. As I said, you start out with Article 47, the Union Rolling Work Program. Then it goes to Article 48, where ENISA is asked to actually create such a scheme. That's done by creating this ad hoc group, Article 49.4. Then it's developed. You get all the details in Article 49, and the other references you see there. But the main part is done actually in this ad hoc working group, which is again in yellow to guide you. The ECCG is always there to help, to discuss, because in the end, when you look on the right-hand side, you get the opinion of the ECCG in Article 62. But in the comitology process for the implementing act, all member states, or at least a certain majority of member states, has to agree. And since the ECCG is composed of the member states, it's a vital group to actually acknowledge the work. So that's why NISA has to take utmost account of the ECCG opinion, that in the end, this comitology process is actually successful. So what has been done on this front so far? One scheme is very advanced. That's the common criteria scheme. There, the implementing act is currently under discussion. So the member states are looking at it now, if they like the legal text, and then it will come into force later this year. So once the formal voting or the formal comitology process has succeeded. But what's important to know, it's only for the levels substantial and high. So for the level basic, the lowest assurance level, we don't have any scheme yet. Then we have the cloud scheme. There's a first draft available. I think it was published late last year. And there's also standardization work now ongoing. But they're in the middle of the ad hoc work, actually in the middle of discussion how to create the scheme. And at the beginning, there's a 5G group where just currently the work is starting up. Experts are assembled. Here, the focus will be rather on the lower end side of the assurance level. So for basic and substantial, just to get the 5G domain rolling. As I said, I don't know, and I really would like to know what is the status of the union ruling work program. So the plan of the commission, which has been brought in by industry, about the next schemes. And the draft, which I saw last year, which was out for commenting, said that Internet of Things, IoT, ISCS, would be the next candidates. And if you look there, there was a footnote which actually said, we are interested in FITCEM. We called it Lightweight back then. And if there's a scheme which is interested in FITCEM, which is interesting in what we're doing, may it be a horizontal scheme or a vertical scheme, how would it work out? So we're now returning to the core idea of my talk. There would be the ad hoc working group, again in yellow. So you can recognize it's the same group as I said above, which take our methodology. So the European Standard 1764. I hope it really gets published soon. It can be used, but as I said, there was an unfortunate delay. They would look at this standard and put in the parameters. For example, a simple parameter is, I said it's a fixed time standard, but what is the time? So you could fix it to 20 days, to 30 days, to 40 days. So it really depends on the risk environment, the risk assessment of the standard of the scheme. For example, there could be in the medical domain, they could come to another value, then they could do in the industrial automation domain, and then there could be another domain which says another value. So this, for example, is one of the parameters, and I'll give you an example in a moment to make it more illustrative, to illustrate it better. And then the ad hoc working group would also look what kind of technical requirements are necessary. For example, you know the 62443 standard, which has lots of technical requirements for industrial automation and control systems. They could use this or prepare one of those standards. And then once the scheme is operational, actually you could go for evaluation, you could go for certification. You have evaluators. They would take this methodology I'm presenting to you and use it. They would look, okay, do I do penetration testing? I have 4 work units, and I would execute it step by step, take into account the parameters set by this ad hoc working group. The manufacturer in the end, of course, can look at our methodology, but he would actually use, of course, the technical requirements, which say what kind of security properties his device needs to fulfill. Now I want to give you an example. It's on purpose a rather funny example because I don't want to go into any real area. Then we were discussing strange details instead of giving you the general idea. Let's say I want to make a scheme for smart screws. Whatever this may mean, I don't care. And the standard has more background on this than I'm presenting on the slide. But we have 3 levels. There could be one level basic, where you have screws which are used for general purposes, for example, for general customers, the layman, if you like. Then, of course, there's an industry use. You would have go to substantial, and then there might screws, those smart screws might be used in critical infrastructures. And then you would go to the level high, where you say you really need high assurance that the screws are working as intended. In the basic level, you would, of course, look if your set is complete. Do you have all documentation? Do you have the smart screw under evaluation? You just have a list of security functionality, which you would review. So no security target. We say that's too much for just using the layman use of screws. This FITCEM standard says there's a checklist. Well, it's a technical data sheet. So something the vendor already has, so just listing the basic technical features, and it would be checked by the evaluator if it's complete and doesn't have any fallacies, obviously. And then the evaluator would install the screw. So that would be enough. Of course, there's a scheme requirement, and the scheme requirement says, for example, for this checklist, there's one certain thing to be included. He would check this. But as you can see, there's not much done on the evaluator side. It's a basic scheme. It's intended for mass market, rather really quick. Then you go to level substantial. I said this is, of course, for industry need. There you also have the completeness check. But now we have a security target, so some more documentation done by the vendor. Maybe it's already now 10 pages instead of 1 page. They have some development documentation. Again, we say it's sufficient to have this technical data sheet. We don't change it here. You can see it's not always necessary to ask for more in higher levels. Again, the tow would be installed by the evaluator, but now you have some conformance testing, where we say you would use n days for each functionality. It could have 3 functionalities, then would be n times 3. And then you have some other feature, it's called shareability. If that support is included, there would be another day's testing. You would also do some vulnerability testing. There's some prepared lists by the scheme, which say, okay, you have this, let's say 20 vulnerabilities you would have to check for. And you would use sampling for a certain number of days to look for these vulnerabilities. And you would do some basic crypto analysis. And then you go to the level high. Here again, the first part is the same, completeness, target evaluation, and development documentation. But now we ask that also the developer provides an architectural overview. We use it for critical infrastructures, and we want to know the basic design. It's really focused on basic. It's an overview of the architecture. It's not a design specification or something detailed. Again, the evaluator would check if the screw can be installed as intended. And now we ask for a complete test of the conformance, full coverage. And we explicitly say there are some acceptance criteria which are now mandatory. That's one of the parameters. But here in this example, you say it's mandatory to use this acceptance criteria. And then we would use penetration testing. So really the highest art of looking for vulnerabilities. Again, we would use the stop list, but we ask the evaluator to go beyond it, to make his own research. And we would use an extended crypto analysis, which really look at the design information for the cryptography in detail for some number of days, set days here. And you could put this example now with a real domain for your mind to see that we can really adapt and look which kind of evaluation task you would need for your scheme. We are not finished. Once I said we're in the voting process now, but that's a rather formal part, so we hope to have the content there and ready. There will, of course, be lots of details we'll discuss in November in our next meeting when we have all the results of the voting. But we also have some topics which we weren't able to cover in this 1 year, which I showed you essential for our development. There's one part, it's development process. As you all know, there needs to be some secure design process to get really the secure product. There's certain ideas. For example, if you look at the common criteria, they have a certain model of development. If you look at 62443, it's a standard used in industrial automation control system. They have another model of development. We have also to look how you can effectively audit this development process and what kind of information you need. What really does help you for when you look at the elevation of the toe. And the other topic is composition, where you look of putting things together. So you have, for example, a smart card, which has been certified for common criteria, which you use in the device. And now how does it work together? What kind of information do I get? What do I need to do with my device, which is using the smart card? But also the other way around, if you say you create some device and you know it will be integrated in a larger device, and you want to evaluate a small device, what kind of evidence do you need to prepare that the other evaluation can do its job properly? And again, we want to reduce evaluator workload there. So don't repeat things which have already been done. So that's not trivial. We started work on this last year, but we found out it was too much to get it done in our schedule. So we shifted them out. We're discussing them this year. And then we have to see how we integrate it. Maybe we make an addendum or whatever, or an extra document we have to discuss. But we didn't want to delay the main content because these are rather, these require more discussion. As I said, the inquiry vote is in progress. So if I caught now your idea and you like the idea and you would like to comment on this, I urge you to go to your national standardization body, which is DIN in Germany or AFNO in France. Then you could access to the standard, to the draft, and provide your comments. So it's about, I think the beginning of September is the closing of the commenting period. So it's actually around the right time for putting in, or the right chance to put in feedback, if you like. And then I said we will discuss them in November and resolve them, and hopefully we can go for publication. Depends on the outcome of the vote, of course. At the same time, we are looking at these novel ideas. I showed you composition, I showed you development process, but also patch management belongs into this domain. And of course, the Commission has approached us indirectly and asked us about the standard. We will be keeping on this informal discussions and look if further schemes can actually use the standard. For example, if the union rolling work program contains industrial automation, and they would start work, we will present it there. It has been used in trials, so maybe it can be used there formally as well. And also, maybe we can get at some later stage a scheme entirely devoted to this fixed time or formerly light-white certification. That of course would be quite well as well. So to summarize my talk, the key points is that this standard is an evaluation methodology for products. So you can't do cloud, sorry. It's novel, yes, but it is a proven track. The French CSPN is now running for about 10 years or 12 years, I'm not sure exactly. It is highly flexible. And the key design element is this fixed time evaluation, where you know very early in the process how long it will take. And by design, it is ideally suited for usage in future scheme, in future Cybersecurity Act scheme, and similar approaches. Of course, if you have some idea on the national level, we say, well, I like this idea, I want to use it, please go ahead, try it, give us feedback. It's usable there as well. But we had the Cybersecurity Act in mind. That's probably the key message there. With this, I would conclude my talk, and I'm now up for question.
Many thanks, Helge, for this very detailed presentation that also shows, anybody who has been working in standardization organization knows the amount of energies you have to devote to get to results, and you have shown us all the effort that you have put into this. And also thank you very much for sticking to the time. So we have about 20 minutes for Q&A that can emerge from the floor. So I invite all the participants to raise their question. I see that Kai already wants to intervene. So Kai, you have the floor.
So let's see whether it works audit-wise. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I hear you very fine.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Sorry for the problems earlier. Thanks a lot, Helge, for this great talk. I was asking for having this talk here in this environment because I think it will be very, very relevant. The standard will be very relevant for the future European certification system. And I have two related questions. One thing is, I could imagine that the 5G initiative will also make use of the standard, and I was wondering whether you know anything about that. The other question relates to your slide number 5, where you have talked about horizontal and vertical applications of it. Actually, I had seen that in an earlier talk, and I found out that there was an interesting, let's say, different understanding by people what is vertical and what is horizontal. And given that the application of this standard is maybe coming, I wanted to raise this issue to also to see in the group how we have the feeling how this works, because maybe the standard will trigger us to develop a more precise understanding of horizontal and vertical. But maybe let's first Helge comment on the 5G question.
Yes. So formally, I don't know nothing, but informally, at least some national bodies have indicated that they are considering this. The formal call is based on another standard, which is called NISAS. It's a standard from the GSMEA. So I think that's what they want to start with. But it's only suited at the moment for the basic assurance level. And the question is, of course, what do you do for substantial and high? There's probably, well, I'm not expert in 5G, but most likely there is some need for higher assurance. For example, if you use 5G in critical infrastructures. There's, as far as I know, ongoing discussion. Some people prefer common criteria there, but other people also talk about using, for example, FITCEM there. But there's no formal decision or call for input. But again, the ad hoc working group, which is going to start soon, they probably might discuss this, but I cannot foresee on this front in the future. So is that enough for your first question?
For me,
Thanks.
Kai, go.
Thanks a lot. Yes, that's very helpful. I think it also shows how these things can be applied. So basically, ENISA or else can create a group that is going to set up the criteria for a specific domain, and then of course but those criteria would still follow a kind of common framework, and that's why I think the standard which is building the common framework is so relevant to be understood well. Yes, and now in relation to that, maybe the second question, and so I've seen earlier presentations of this, and then people were discussing what do we mean with horizontal and what do we mean with vertical. So I've seen one view that said, okay, and horizontal is basically something like common criteria on existing implementation scheme, and vertical is basically a technology. So if we work for smart screws or 5G, that would be vertical. And if we work towards an evaluation scheme with its ideas like common criteria, that's horizontal. And
that's
then I've seen
I'm using it. Yes.
And then I've seen another definition by some people in industry who've said, well, vertical is the application of a technology in a certain domain, like, for example, screws for railways, or 5G for railways, or 5G for automotive, or trusted platform modules for automotive. So basically, in the industrial sector, that would be vertical, and horizontal is basically a certain technology itself. So 5G, smart screws, TPMs also. And obviously, these two different definitions exist. They're not defined in the standard, of course, but they're somehow defined in the community. And I think it's important probably to get a joint understanding in the community what we want to use and how we want to use these terms to actually be able to build a proper framework for this standard. And so it's partly a question, of course, to Helge, how he sees this discussion, and maybe also to us in future in Cybersec for Europe to develop an understanding and to avoid these upcoming misunderstandings that may happen.
The part for me is we already had a small exchange after the last talk where you already raised this issue, and I discussed this with colleagues. So people coming from well, my agency BSI, in which I'm involved in the development of the Cybersecurity Act and in the development of schemes, usually have this first definition. So horizontal is like common criteria, and vertical is, for example, for industrial automation and control systems for 5G or whatever. So that's the definition we use within our, let's say, peer group at the moment. But I'm open, of course, to review my point on this. But that's my background and how we use it.
Now, I sympathize with this view. On the other side, the other view, of course, is also common. I was wondering, nobody has really defined this yet somewhere or given an explanation on it in terms of a glossary document or paper explaining to people, hey, there are different communities that are using these things partly exactly opposite to each other. Or have you seen anything like that? Or have you maybe seen where these terms actually came up for during the development of the standards? Was there any communities bringing these terms in from somewhere or to somewhere?
I'm not aware of a formal definition, but maybe ENISA, which produces quite a few documents, has written it down somewhere. But I apologize, I'm not aware of some formal standard or formal definition.
No need for you to apologize. Basically, for me, just an awareness call for also the group in Cybersec for Europe to be aware of this and to see what one can possibly need to do with this fact or situation. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Many thanks, both of you, for this very interesting interaction. Let's see if we have somebody else who wants to raise a question. Feel free to open your mic or just write the question in the chat.
So I think there's a question from Bernie. Sorry,
yes.
I hope I pronounce your name correct.
Yeah.
If you ask me personally or the group which is developing the standard, we of course would like to have as few standards as possible. So we would like to go for the evaluation standard, the evaluation methodology, yes. But I think it will be probably not completely possible. I think there will be some domains which insist on using their own. But on the other hand, I don't have an actually glass ball to foresee what kind of driving forces in the industry there are. So to actually say what they will use is a little bit difficult for me. But the design is that it's be as broadly applicable as possible. So there's the common criteria, which has more on, let's say, very high end. If you not only need a risk-based assurance, but a complete assurance, where you need formal models, mathematical proofs. This we can't offer. So I think that's a good distinction to common criteria. But on the other hand, I do assume that some industries, for example, 5G now starts up with NISAs. I don't know if they will use it in the long run, but at the moment they have something specific. I don't know how much the driving force behind 62443 is. They are currently working on the methodology as well. So that's an interesting question, and I'm also curious how it turns out in the future. But by design, I would really hope that we don't have too many evaluation methodologies, and we would really like to have this one as broadly applicable as possible.
Thanks for the question and for the answers, both of you. We still have 10 minutes if we have any other questions that is arising from the floor. Again, just open your mic or write the question in the chat. If there are no other questions, I just wanted to ask to Helge how he sees in this context and in this ecosystem the future role of ENISA. Do you think that there is something that ENISA could improve, do better, and so on as an institution?
Yes, ENISA has a very important role because you have so many member states and they all have their own ideas. So you need some, what's in English, some conductor I think that's a good picture. Somebody who really likes this certification orchestra making a nice music. There are mechanisms in the Cybersecurity Act, but really to have them all play together, it is as simple like one web page, which is already set in the Cybersecurity Act, where all the certificates are listed. But there's so much going on behind the scenes, and so that's a very important role for NISA to bring all these well, experienced and not so experienced cybersecurity certification agencies from different member states. Some have a long track history, for example, the French one. Some are rather new to this game. Bring them all together and make really a nice, consistent, and helpful certification scheme for Europe.
And how do you see that the interaction between an institution like ENISA, which of course is a clear mandate and focus on security, in the cooperation with other authorities, public authorities, European and national, which instead have their focus on more the data protection side? Do you envisage and support forms of further coordination and cooperation? Because, I mean, on one side, we have the things that we have described today, Cybersecurity Act and this kind of certification. On the other side, we also have the certification of data processing activities, for instance. So one might argue that we also need form of further cooperation, integration between the authorities and between these different activities. Do you see discussions going on there?
To be honest, I'm not so much involved in the privacy side, so I really hope there are discussions, but I'm not aware of any formal discussions. But actually, okay. I would expect them, but no, I can't tell you.
Yeah, because I am speaking from the privacy side, and
sure.
I see the relevance, of course, and the possibility of integration and coordination and further strengthening of the relationship between the two angles,
yes,
which will come one way or another, because this is key in any kind of European future initiative in the field. Helge, I want to give you the floor for a final word, since we are in our last 5 minutes. I want to thank you on behalf of Work Package 8, Cybersec for Europe, and the Insight webinar series. Thanks also to Kai, which is our coordinator, which has been with us. So you have the floor for your final statement, Helge.
Thank you very much. I thank you again for having the chance to present it here. And I would also invite you to consider if this is an approach which you could support. And if you do so, please tell your national standardization body so that we get a good vote, and we hopefully have very soon a workable and usable standard. And again, thank you to all of you.
So many thanks for all of you. Many thanks for those of you that at the end of July are not on holiday and have been spending this hour with us. We will be back with other Cybersec for Europe Insight webinars, I assume from September now. And so you will receive a communication of the new initiative. So thank you very much for spending this hour with us. Bye-bye.
Bye.